Obi-Wan Kenobi should have been a movie, a lean, mean 2-hour story that was squarely focused on Obi-Wan's journey of accepting the fall of the Republic and coming to terms with his guilt at killing Anakin Skywalker. A movie that made full use of Ewan McGregor's considerable acting talent and helped bridge the gap between the prequels and the original trilogy. But unfortunately, what we got was a slow, overly convoluted and repetitive series stretched out to fill 6 episodes of TV because it's all about streaming now. So because I think this story would have been far more effective as a movie, I have made Kenobi, a Star Wars story, a 2-hour feature film that tells the story of the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV series in a way that hopefully does way more justice to these characters than the full series did. Because I didn't just cut out scenes from the TV show to tell this story. No, I restructured the narrative, streamlined characters and storylines, added better music, and even a de-aged Hayden Christensen to make what I think is a much more cohesive Star Wars story than what we got in the show. And you can watch it. Because I didn't hate the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. In fact, there are some moments that I genuinely loved. But I'm a fan of quality, not quantity, and in the case of the Obi-Wan series, I felt that its quality moments were overshadowed by the quantity of unnecessary filler. Whatever the flaws the prequels may have, they tell a compelling and cohesive story, and I genuinely think there is an untold story between this moment and this one. I hoped Obi-Wan Kenobi would be that story. And you know what? It sort of was. Buried in there among the bloated plot, the convoluted side quests, the tiny dimly lit sets and the myriad side characters was a real story of this phase of Obi-Wan's journey from guilt to acceptance, carried by Ewan McGregor in the role he was born to play. The best moments of this series are the ones where we see these moments shine through all the noise. But rather than go on about the things I liked or didn't like in the series, I think the best thing to do will be for me to just walk you through the edit I have made. If you are after a really detailed breakdown of how the show failed to live up to its potential, I have put some links in the description for you to check out. But in this video, I'm going to show you what changes I have made to make this story flow better as a movie, focused on Obi-Wan's journey. The final cut is 124 minutes without credits, which puts it at the shorter end of Star Wars movies. And that's compared to the 227-minute runtime of the TV show, and that's without the recaps or the credits. Now, this next bit feels a bit weird to say because if you're watching this, you already know the story of the show, but if you don't want my edit to be spoiled, you can stop this video now, after subscribing and sharing it with your friends, and find some information in the description about how to get the full edit. And as a final disclaimer, I obviously couldn't do anything about the production design decisions. So if your problems with the show were about its setting or casting or major story beats, then I can't fix that. But what I can change is the pace and focus of the narrative, and for me, these were by far the biggest flaws the show had. So with all that out of the way, we begin like all the other Star Wars films, with a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But we skip the recap of the prequels because we pretty much get the exact same thing a few scenes later in Obi-Wan's nightmare. We also cut the Jedi Temple scene and instead begin with the Inquisitors landing on Tatooine. Most Star Wars stories begin by establishing the antagonists, so we do that here too. And on that note, one thing I wanted to do with this edit was to make sure this felt like a Star Wars movie. So sometimes I have done things like add establishing shots of planets where the show had none, included some screen wipes and music from the original films, and I even added a Wilhelm scream. Where is it? Well, you'll have to watch and find out, but I can tell you right now it's not here. So this opening shot is actually from Attack of the Clones, but I included it here because Star Wars movies all start in space, and Kenobi is no different. Now, I'm not going to go through every single change I made in this video, but I will give a detailed breakdown of the changes I made to the first episode to give you an idea of the sort of thing I have done throughout the whole show to restructure it into a feature film. So episode 1 of Obi-Wan Kenobi has about 25 scenes, and it does 4 things. Establishes Obi-Wan's isolation, establishes Reva specifically hunting Kenobi, it introduces us to Leia, her getting captured and her parents asking Obi-Wan for help, and it ends with Obi-Wan deciding to leave Tatooine to save her. This is basically Act 1 of a feature film. You have the status quo, the inciting incident, and end with a decision by the protagonist to act, and you also set up the antagonist. So in my edit, this all pretty much still happens, but in a way that I think flows much more neatly. So we already know the prequel recaps and the Jedi Temple scenes are gone. As I just said, we instead start with the Inquisitors scene. Now let me just remind you of how this episode carries on from this point, scene by scene, because crikey, it's a mess. Are you ready? Okay, We see Obi-Wan at work witnessing the altercation with his colleague and boss. Then he goes home, cooks dinner, meets the Jawa, has a nightmare flashback, watches Luke the next day, drops off the toy that night, and meets the Jedi on the way home. Then we have Leia's fake out, her in the forest and her talking to her mother. Back to Obi-Wan being confronted by Owen, the Inquisitors showing up, the fifth brother arguing with Reva about her obsession with Obi-Wan. Back to Leia on the landing platform, then at the reception, then at home, then in the forest again with the terrible chase. 40 minutes into the episode, we get the inciting incident of the Organas asking Obi-Wan for help. He says no, then we see Leia on the ship with the mercenaries, then Obi-Wan sees the dead Jedi and is confronted by Bail in his home and convinced to help. Literally 3 minutes ago, he said no. He digs up his lightsaber, we see the mercenaries talking to Reva, then Obi-Wan gets on the transport and the episode ends. So that's 48 minutes with about 25 scenes or location changes. Yeah, no. Act 1 should be no more than a quarter of the runtime, so let's bring this down to about 25 minutes, ideally without sacrificing too much of the character stuff. So in my edit, Obi-Wan is at the factory but we cut the altercation. He just gets on the transport, then he goes straight to watching Luke. In this scene I added the early bars of the music from the Twin Suns scene, parallels of Luke dreaming of a world beyond Tatooine. It sounds obvious, but the Star Wars TV shows need more Star Wars music. From Luke, we cut to Leia, almost as if Obi-Wan is thinking about her as well. Leia's introduction is cut down from about 11 minutes to 5 and is all told in one sequence. We cut the fake out of the forest and her conversation with her mother. Instead, this is just her getting ready and we immediately go to the landing platform, then the reception. I wanted to keep her conversation with Bail to show their relationship, which meant including the annoying cousin, but it works fine enough to establish her character, so both scenes have instead just been shortened. She runs away into the forest and encounters the mercenary. But then we cut it here. No need for the stupid chase, which is truly one of the worst choreographed sequences in all of Star Wars. She's a 10-year-old girl up against trained adult mercenaries. She just gets captured straight away. Done. Next is Obi-Wan coming home, but instead of the Jawa he's reacting to, it's the communication from Bail. He refuses, but that evening we see him having the nightmares. See, he's guilty about failing Anakin, but also about not helping Bail. So after waking up that night, he delivers Luke the toy and meets the Jedi on his way home. The next day, Owen confronts him, but we cut the Inquisitors showing up because this scene just repeats what we established in the first scene, that they're hunting the Jedi and Reva wants Obi-Wan. No, it's gone. Instead, we cut from the moment Owen leaves to another day at work for Obi-Wan. It is here that he sees the dead Jedi and then comes home to find Bail. So now, since he was asked for help, he has seen the consequences of his refusal to act, has been told to stay away from Luke, and we have seen him face his guilt in a way that directly tied it to his refusal to help Leia. So in this version, his change of mind has much more weight and consequence, rather than happening literally 3 minutes after he first said no. I cut all the stuff with the mercenaries on the ship with Leia, but kept the scene where Reva explains why she ordered them to capture Leia because we need some plot. So here's how Act 1 looks in my new structure. The clipped corners represent a scene that has been shortened. I think you'll agree this is a much more efficient and effective way to tell Act 1 of this story, and actually does more justice to Obi-Wan's character than the show does, because we have focused the storytelling and narrative on Obi-Wan's motivation for choosing to help Leia. Now, I'm not going to talk through the full edit in this level of detail for the other 5 episodes because we'd be here all day, but this should be good enough to give you an idea of how I have approached editing the full thing into a movie. So now let me walk you through how the rest of the movie plays out in a bit less detail. After Obi-Wan agrees to help, he flies off into Act 2 of the movie. On Daiyu, he is more or less immediately taken to Haja. Then he breaks into the lab and rescues Leia first time. The mercenaries haven't set up the trap for him. We keep most of the Leia Obi-Wan character building stuff from the start of the episode, but we cut a lot of the Inquisitor stuff. I also cut the scene of Leia running away from Kenobi because it's stupid and pointless. In this version they are just on the run and then the main story beats play out in the same way just without the chase. Haja saves them, they go to the cargo bay, Reva kills the Grand Inquisitor and reveals that Anakin is still alive. Leia and Obi-Wan escape, and we see Obi-Wan reflecting on the revelation that Anakin is alive using the montage from the start of episode 3. Landing on Mapuzo, and this whole segment also plays out more or less the same as the episode, again just shorter. I cut the scene with the stormtroopers on the truck, but kept the conversation about Padme because it's good character stuff and sets up Obi-Wan's final speech to Leia. I cut most of the Inquisitor stuff from this episode as well. We just have one scene of them confirming Obi-Wan is on Mapuzo, which explains how Darth Vader knows he is there. After the fight at the checkpoint, point, Tala rescues them and brings them to her hideout. I cut the stormtroopers searching the workshop, but the ending of this episode plays out the same way as the show. The only change is that Reva doesn't find Tala's hideout or capture Leia. We can assume Leia followed Tala's instructions and met the pilot, while Tala goes on to save Obi-Wan. From the close-up of Vader watching Obi-Wan escape, we then cut to Mustafar because it is here that I've put Vader's Skype call with Palpatine from episode 6. If you listen to the conversation, I actually think it works much better at this point in the story because it sets up Vader for the rest of the film by showing that he, like Obi-Wan, has not let go of the past. Obi-Wan being rescued from Vader happens just after the midpoint of the film, about 75 minutes into the runtime. Fun fact, 75 minutes into the original version of A New Hope, Vader has this exchange.
He is here.
Obi-Wan Kenobi. What makes you think so?
The last time I felt it was in the presence of my old master.
The princess? Put all sections on alert.
Obi-Wan is here.
Second fun fact, 75 minutes into the Revenge of the Sith, this moment happens.
Henceforth, you shall be known as Darth Vader.
This wasn't intentional, but it is a happy accident. Anyway, in the Kenobi movie so far, we have established Obi-Wan's guilt and isolation, his fear of Vader, and his relationship with Leia. We have shown him that there is a wider rebellion out there, and he has seen the consequences of his non-interference. We've also shown Vader as a terrifying force of evil, hell-bent on capturing Obi-Wan. Moving on, and besides the Bapta tank, episode 4 is cut entirely. This episode is by far the worst of the entire show and adds absolutely nothing except making some vague attempts at fleshing out some supporting characters, and it's painfully repetitive watching Leia get rescued a second time in 2 episodes. Plus, this scene is just like, whose idea was this? Yeah, episode 4 is gone. Instead, we have Obi-Wan heal at the Rebel base where he, Tala, and Leia escaped to. We then use scenes from episode 5 to develop Tala's character and the rebellion in more depth. So these scenes show Obi-Wan the importance of doing his part to fight the Empire, not just hiding away from it all. It gives meaning to his decision later on to confront Vader and allow the others to escape. So a lot of episode 5 remains but has been edited down, and again some scenes have been swapped around to make it flow more consistently or to maintain continuity in this new story edit. For example, we cut Bail's message to Obi-Wan because we are also cutting the entire sequence of Reva hunting Luke from episode 6, so we don't need this plot device. But the assault, Tala's death, and Obi-Wan's conversations with Reva all remain. Also, because of the cuts we have made so far, this moment is the first time in the movie we see Obi-Wan use the Force, and isn't that a way better payoff than what we got in episode 4? After enduring his lowest point, then being given hope by Tala and the Rebellion, Obi-Wan begins his redemption by choosing to help. It's a turning point in his character. It's the moment he becomes a Jedi again. The escape and Reva's confrontation with Vader are also mostly unchanged, except we cut away before she finds the communicator because, again, the storyline with her hunting Luke has been removed entirely from this edit. In my headcanon she dies, but I've left it ambiguous enough that it won't break canon if she appears in a future Star Wars property, and that's also why I kept the Grand Inquisitor in, even though I disliked the fact that somehow he returned. But Reva's arc in this story ends here. Her hunting Luke adds absolutely nothing and is one of my least favourite things in the entire show for reasons I won't bore you with here because this video is long enough as it is. But to be honest, I think the only reason they included this sequence was because they needed to include Reva in the finale, and for pacing reasons they needed a parallel storyline to cut away to during the showdown between Anakin and Obi-Wan. So what do we cut to in order to pace out the final duel? Well, obviously we use the flashbacks to Coruscant. I truly think that this was how both scenes were first written because they just edit together so well. Intercutting them also reminds us of how these two characters were once brothers. We see the light and humanity of the past against the darkness of the present, and it just makes this final battle so much more emotive. Also, I have to acknowledge 2 far more talented editors than me for this bit. Firstly, for the flashbacks, I have used the incredible de-aging work done by Darth Porg to make Hayden Christensen look a bit more like his younger self. Second, I have used Cinevor's amazing rescore of the final duel to set the fight to Battle of the Heroes from Revenge of the Sith. Links to the original versions of both these videos in the description. Seriously, check them out, they're way better at this stuff than me. With the duel over, we wrap things up more or less how the show does. Obi-Wan's farewell with Leia and his reconciliation with Owen. But here is where I have made a change that will be controversial, so I want to explain why I did it. I have cut Obi-Wan meeting Luke and the line,
"Hello there."
I know, I love it too. It's a great meme and is synonymous with Ewan's Kenobi, even though it's also the first line Alec Guinness has as the character. But the way the show used it here was just far too self-referential, bordering on breaking the fourth wall. The framing of the shot, the build up of the music, holding on Ewan's face after he says it, they just give it way too much reverence, almost as if the entire story was building up to him saying this line. So I cut it. But not to worry, the line has instead been moved to when he meets Bail on Tatooine.
Hello there.
So in the world of the story, it's just a casual greeting between the characters, but one the audience will recognize and love. I kept Qui-Gon in though, because even though I think Liam Neeson was totally wasted with such a short appearance, Yoda explicitly says Qui-Gon's Force Ghost will train Obi-Wan at the end of Revenge of the Sith, so we need to explain why he wasn't there up until this point. And so with the Star Wars theme playing over the credits, this is how we end Kenobi, a Star Wars story with a runtime of just over 2 hours. This was a complicated project, but I really like the final product, and I hope you do too. If nothing else, it has confirmed for me that this story would have worked so much better as a feature film, and I really hope Disney and Lucasfilm take a long, hard look in the mirror and bring us another feature-length Star Wars story, rather than yet another streaming show. Star Wars deserves the big screen, and the TV format is leading to stories that feel small in scale, as well as bloated and convoluted storytelling. Bring us another Rogue One, please, I beg of you. If you've made it this far into the video, I really hope you check out the full edit. There's links in the description with instructions on how to do this. This is entirely a fan project, and I'm making no money off this whatsoever. Even this video is definitely going to get claimed. But fan edits are still a bit of a legal grey zone when it comes to copyright, so I ask that you please only watch my edit if you have a full Disney Plus subscription and legally purchased hard copies of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, because I lifted some scenes and audio from those too. If you liked this video or the edit, the best thing you can do to show your support is to subscribe, share this video around and spread the word. I'd really appreciate it. So that's it. Thanks for watching, enjoy the movie, and may the Force be with you.